Ed Blakely has served in different capacities under a succession of presidential administrations, has guided government policy on urban planning, and is a widely cited academic. My name is Sean Britton from 2SER 107.3 in Sydney, and each week Ed and I have a chat about what's the latest news out of the United States, talking everything politics, planning and policy from sea to shining sea. Find us on iTunes, Whooshka, Facebook and Twitter at US of Ed. 4th of July. A great deal of celebration going on, but with divisions getting deeper and deeper in the States, is this date a great unifier? Is it still a great unifier?
I think people are marching off in different directions this year. Maybe some people may be marching across the border. This is not a unifying period, and the president is the person who's perpetrating the disuniting of the United States.
Before we get too far into the US news, you mentioned the border there. Mexico has a new president-elect, Andrés Manuel López Obrador. AMLO to his friends, he's a leftist, which is a change for the country. Interestingly enough, though, like Trump, wants changes to the North American Free Trade Agreement. Certainly some negotiations to go on, Ed.
Yeah, but the bigger thing about him is he's very hard on crime. He may stop a lot of this movement of people across his borders because they're bringing drugs, and the drugs are hurting Mexico. So we may see a very different situation with almost nobody coming across the border. People don't remember this, but I think in Obama's second term, there's actually decline of people coming across the border because the Mexican economy was so hot and things were calm in Central America. So it's possible that people in the United States will be begging for people to come across the border to cut their lawns and take care of their babies and cook their food.
Indeed, some of those Midwestern farmers we've mentioned previously really struggling to find hands.
That's right. And just like here, it's very difficult to find people who've had any education who want to go into the fields or go into slaughterhouses and those kinds of jobs. And even prawns and things like this require manual labor. So that manual labor not being around is a big harm to the U.S. economy.
Trump's head of the Environmental Protection Agency, Scott Pruitt, the latest resignation as of just this morning. He's been facing a number of scandals, spending big chunks of taxpayer money while slashing through regulations that actually protected the environment. Is it good news to get the EPA back on track, Ed, or are we just going to face more of the same?
Well, the EPA is not back on track yet. Scott Pruitt clearly was the wrong person for the job. But Scott Pruitt had the bus tracks on his chest very early on because of his personal behavior. But that doesn't mean the agency will change. What is interesting about this, he was turned in by his own staff. And I think we're going to see more of that around Washington and other departments because the president is exerting no leadership in the departments. And so the departmental heads are there just swinging in the winds. Unless you're Pompeo or the chief of defense, your staff sees you as fair game. And I think we're going to see more of this. Trump just has not built an organization. He does his thing and lets them do their thing. That will not last and it can't work.
Even to some extent, it seems less that Trump has not taken an active enough hand, but he really seems to approve of this management style, which is just a battle royale.
Well, I don't know if it's a style or what it is. I think it's a failure by him and his immediate staff to take control. And you just can't do that in any big organization. The organization has to have some direction. And particularly when the president or the CEO goes off in his directions, then other people go off in theirs. And we're going to see more. I think the HUD secretary will be gone next and the education secretary after that. And they may not even be replaced.
Wanted to talk some of the trade issues this week. News this week, the Trump administration wants to pull the United States out of the World Trade Organization, the largest economic organization in the world. would be a huge blow for fair trade around the world. Is it Trump's intention or the intention of those around him to upset the apple cart even further?
This would be the most outrageous and perhaps the most dangerous thing that Trump could do. The last time the United States did this was in 1895 with the Harley-Smoot Act, which brought down the United States in 1928 with the Great Depression. As soon as countries start putting up those barriers and trade stops, the economy stops flowing and there's an implosion. And that's what happened. Well, that's what's happening now. What is interesting here is that the countries that he wants to put up trade barriers with are the very countries the United States needs. If the United States does not import steel from China, how can you build anything? And that steel that's imported needs to be fashioned into finished steel. There is no American plant that's going to make raw steel. It is very cumbersome, it is very expensive, and it's not worth the United States' time. India is, in fact, one of the largest producers of steel because they have the capacity to do this. The United States needs that to make automobiles. So here we're headed for a collision. Harley-Davidson really made it clear that the United States cannot win if it attempts to bully other people in trade. U.S. is the hub of global trade, not on the periphery.
Speaking of targets for the Trump administration, we know Obama's legacy, Barack Obama's legacy, has been a big target for Donald Trump. The biggest part of that legacy, Obamacare, reports this week that in spite of a lack of support, Obamacare premiums haven't risen much as predicted, remaining stable, I believe, in some states, and essentially, far from imploding, Obamacare is still going strong.
It's getting bigger. As a matter of fact, it's getting better. What the president didn't realize is that there's a trigger in Obamacare that allows you to use Medicare as a supplement to Obamacare if the states will sign up. Well, most of the states are signing up now. So now Obamacare is bigger than it ever was. The southern states that didn't want Obamacare and basically staved it off for a while, including Florida, are signing up now. 3 reasons for that. The first is that big health carriers don't want to do business unless they have the backup of Obamacare. The second is employers want to have their people covered. And the third reason is a lot of poor people need coverage, and you don't want them going to emergency rooms. I think we have the same problem in Australia.
Absolutely. On the same topic of legacy, affirmative action, the Trump administration and Education Secretary Betsy DeVos to get rid of Obama-era guidelines for colleges to consider race of applicants. Very unpopular amongst the angry, white, feeling hard done by base for Trump. What's your take?
Well, first place, this was not Obama's. This was the Supreme Court. Now, if he wants to make that change, good luck. Race is not really the issue here. It is poverty or previous circumstances. And the justices said if race is a manifestation of poverty and previous circumstances, it can be used for admissions. You have to be really careful here. Do you want a good footy team?
Certainly. Well, a lot of the colleges do. I know college football's a very big industry over there.
It certainly is, and basketball's big as well. And the white guys seem to come from Croatia.
Just building off some of the immigration issues of the past few weeks, there's a growing list of Democrats, including Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, whose win in New York we spoke about last week, who want to abolish the U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement Outfit, aka ICE. This is a risky issue, I would have to think, to take a stand on, and it's given Trump and Republicans plenty of ammunition. What's your thinking on this one, Ed?
Well, I think it's given the Democrats a lot of ammunition, too. People are talking about closing ICE to keep a discussion going. ICE will not be closed, but Trump is talking about closing the Department of Education and EPA. So everyone's taking sides using the agencies as the whipping persons. I don't think ICE will close. It'll certainly be changed, and it's being changed from the inside. Apparently, a lot of people working there will not follow the orders of the president or their bosses. They're being humane. So I think this is a good issue for Democrats. It is not a bad issue. Moreover, the people who are going to vote for the president on the ICE issue are going to vote for the president and his team anyway. Here's a chance to pick up the Hispanic voters who don't vote. So this is a very good issue for the Democrats. I hope they don't step away from it.
Now, Russia. We can't forget Russia. The Senate Intel Committee is the latest body to say Russia interfered in the 2016 election, and that interference has continued well past that election. We're just stating the obvious at this point, but still Trump and Republicans not interested. At some point, somebody has to remind the sane Republicans that Russia is not doing this because they're just big fans of Donald Trump. They have their own Russia first, Russia last, Russia only agenda, and yet with nothing done to stop it, what's to stop the Russians from continuing attacks in 2018 and beyond?
First of all, the United States does a little of this too. Let's be clear. The United States is not hands off in this arena. I remember in the old days when the United States used the radio even for propaganda purposes. And the regimes that came down, the Allende regime and so forth, the regime in Iran that came down, that was not an accident. So tit for tat in a sense. Maybe what the United States should be afraid of is that the Chinese and the Russians are using American technology better than the Americans are using it, and they had to come alive with that. My concern here is that the United States is not putting up the shields it needs, but the U.S. is not alone. The Canadians and others have to do this too, as well as Australia. So this is a bigger issue, and certainly in the next congressional elections, we're going to see some people who come out very firmly for stringent measures to be taken, and I believe they'll have the assistance now of the big players like Google and Facebook and the rest.
In fact, when we talk about America encouraging regime change, I actually was reading a report earlier this week in Axios that, some Israeli officers had come forward to the journalists and said that they were part of an operation trying to encourage regime change in Iran alongside the US. US and Israel trying to encourage regime change in Iran right now, up to the old CIA tricks, as it were.
Yeah, I mean, in the good old days, we had much more clever people, and Israel, the Massoud, were really good, but I think they've got the second team in now. It's unfortunate that this kind of thing goes on so openly now, but it's always gone on. The Israelis have been, after the Vatican, have the largest spy force in the world, and they use it. And the United States is very much dependent on it, and so are we in Australia. And sometimes, as you know, remember, the Israelis used some Australian identities about 5 or 6 years ago. This is not going to stop.
Absolutely right. Just as a final point, Ed, one we haven't addressed, the Capital Gazette shooting last week. The suspect in the 5 murders, someone who had a personal grudge against the paper for years, at least as far back as 2012. Some, though, have linked the violence to Trump's ongoing war with the media, calling journalists the enemy of the American people and the like. Any final thoughts, Ed?
Oh, well, my thought here is, first of all, we cover this stuff too much. And that gives people like that a lot of courage. It doesn't discourage them. The second thing is, if Trump wants to stop violence in America and people have violent tendencies, he should look at white American males. Every incident we've had has been a person born in the United States, living in some small town, and the like. So maybe, now I don't know how much fencing and walling we could get, but walling in some of these white privileged areas might be an advantage in the United States.
US Event is produced in the studios of 2SCR 107.3 in Sydney. To help support the work we do, go to 2scr.com/donate. Ed and I'll be back next week to talk the latest in American news and politics. Subscribe on iTunes and Whooshka to stay up to date, and show us some love on Facebook and